We're going to do a QA video. Somebody was asking about modeling cylindrical objects with subdivision. A little time and energy and effort and a little know-how. Make some pretty insane things if you want. So that's what we're going to do in this one. And we'll just start in a new scene. I'm going to kind of go through this the way that I learned it anyways. So I'm going to take a cube and merge it at center. Explain this real quick. So we merge at center. We got a single vertex and just going to extrude it out a little bit. So we got a nice edge. Okay. And so more or less we got an edge that creates kind of a profile, right? And so you can do different things with this. If I select the edge and extrude it, for example, you're going to be an edge select for that, by the way. You could do something like this. I'm going to flip my normals. Then we'll go ahead and symmetrize it up real quick. Now, over here, the screw modifier. So you can use those kind of profiles to create either cylinders or something like a wall, maybe in a video game, right? Something real simple, basic. So very useful. Something I want to point out there real quick. You can up res or down res a screw modifier to create a cylinder. But this here, you probably wouldn't think this could be a cylinder. And this is kind of how I got into all this, right? So creating an environment, and I was cutting out a wall piece, something like this. And I found that, at some point, as you're working on these kind of things, that you might want to turn it into a curved piece so that it works as a modular kit anyways. You have the corner units and things. Now, in order to do that, we're working down the y-axis right now. This is important so that it bends correctly, but you would add a simple deform. You would try to bend it, okay? And in our case, it would be on the z-axis. That would end up working like so. Now, you can see it doesn't bend very well. And this is kind of the eureka moment here, I guess, if you would. So you have to add cuts to create cylindrical shape this way, okay? Now the trick is they need to all be kind of evenly spaced vertical cuts. And it starts to bend correctly. Now, the problem is if you have the spacing wrong, they turn into flat spots, right? So you could do that for stylistic purposes or whatever you might be working on might need that. But in our case, we don't really want that. So evenly cut spaces. And it does not necessarily have to be all quads. You can actually lean heavy into triangles more so than maybe n-gons. But this is what's going to make working with cylinders much easier, is when you start thinking about things in this manner. Okay, so inset hold control, hit B, and we could bring that in a little bit, maybe like that. Start doing some fun stuff like this. Now, the issue we're going to have here, of course, is that it is very rough still, so we need a lot more cuts. Either we go through and we start loop cutting it up, but we might be able to do other things. Now, a lot of you guys that watch the channel, you've probably been paying attention to that turbo smooth modifier videos, the last couple videos anyways. Now you can still do similar things like that without creating that geonode setup. It's actually better to use alternatives here. But you can see, so profiles, they turn into cylinders basically is the example. Now, so what do we do? Let's see if we add a subdivision surface. It becomes too soft, right? We could try using classic. We want to make sure the subdivision's before the bend here, right? So we can up-res this in this manner, turn optimal display off, and you can actually up-res it, okay? Very easily, and it still maintains the curvature, and you would never know the difference. Pretty cool, right? So here's the thing, though. Some parts might still be curved, and if that's the case, you're going to want to use creases a lot, quite a bit, actually. And so you can't use the simple deformation, right? Or simple algorithm or whatever. So we'd have to use Catmull-Clark, and it turns soft again. This is where things get a little bit strange because the corners, first of all, round out. We don't want that. So keep corners. Okay. And now all of this in here, if we had pressed Shift E, increased it all, right? Everything, we get this same result. Now, it does basically the same thing as simple. You have to crease these mid edges here, which the turbo smooth setup doesn't really do that. So, but you have to do that. What this does is it allows you to control the edge flows a lot more precisely. Now, because what's going on is that the bend is controlling the curve, it doesn't really care about the top of it that much. We just get higher resolution. So anytime we want to create a curved type piece, like say we want these edges to come out, if we had these marked sharp, or excuse me, creased, not marked sharp, they won't curve. But now you can curve them as well. So you either mark everything as creased and then preserve your curves, or you can kind of go through this without that maybe, and then run holding edges everywhere, which becomes a lot more complicated of a process. But the main idea here is that we can now start working on something at a very low resolution, and we don't necessarily need to subdivide it that much, but we can definitely work on it and get it all working. And start cutting out really cool designs and actually be even kind of sloppy with it if we wanted to. So if we want to just cut something here, let's try that cut again. And just do up. You can use those triangles and lean heavy into them, symmetrize. And hit 2, or excuse me, 2 with machine tools, but J joined right there. We can do things like this all day. We can press E, extrude, right click, use machine tools, Alt A, align to the left. All right, maybe we delete these ones down here. AM, merge by distance. Maybe you're making some kind of like, you're modeling something for a building or something, right? And you're trying to make it so that there's like a little door here or a bulkhead or something so that you get into a base or something like that, right? Insets, you can set, let me turn that drill off on that. I have that on by default. You guys shouldn't have that issue. But you can kind of see where this goes, right? We can keep doing this, but if we don't have those edges marked, sometimes it falls apart. And if you do have them marked, you get these nice topos for the most part. They don't always stay perfect, and you don't always get away with creases. Sometimes you do have to add additional edges. You do have to connect things together. Like you can't just leave something like this necessarily. But you can connect them and kind of do crazy things with them if you wanted to, right? So if we want to create like big triangles and stuff like that, this works out pretty well. Try to make sure I mark all that real quick. You see, it doesn't look good necessarily. And that topology is going to be harder to work with because of that. And we really want to try to keep nice, clean topology so we can detail it a little bit easier. But this is a quad. I don't necessarily need that one. I don't think this edge going in that direction quite works out all that well. I'd rather send it down there. Let's see what happens. Okay. So this is where it gets interesting because we have triangles, right? And when triangles subdivide, you can see it creates the pole at the center and it creates the 3 edges. It creates an end pole, right? Triangles turn into end poles, n-gons turn into e-poles. And so this wouldn't be typically acceptable. Like most of the time, you would think that's not the way you should do that. But matter of fact, if you have a diagonal like this and you try to run edges through it, and you watch anybody doing a subdivision modeling video, they're going to go back and clean these edges up usually. And a lot of times the way they deal with these triangles is they end up just running a edge to the back of it, and they start doing stuff like this perhaps, right? And so what that does is it creates an end pole. It just shifts it over here. The triangles are an acceptable form of topology. You can see the same kind of thing happening here with edge flow. So this big n-gon here, though, on the other hand, a little bit maybe worse. Might need an extra edge for that one. Okay, kind of clean it up a little bit nicer. Now the problem with that one, though, of course, is that it's now created a denser spot right here, and we're still fairly low resolution. So all of these have to go up. Like you want to try to keep these edges balanced a lot of times so that they will bend correctly, if you would. We can kind of line all those back up maybe. Like so. Let me make that a little grayer. There you go. And so eventually we can work all that out. So you do something like this level 1 subdivision with the way we set it up. and you try to keep it as clean as you possibly can. Eventually you get it to the point where you can actually can bend it all the way, right? It's hard to work with it bent all the way, so sometimes it's good to just practice or like work with it like this, and then bend it later. And you can see it bends maybe way too much on ours, so it's not long enough of a piece. So there's circumference or whatever. It's not quite the way we want. We can extend it real quick, try to match it up. We can do something like that. Okay. Now, truth is, right here, this is going to be a lot better now. But the thing is that we want to do a lot of work at this point, right? We want to get a bunch of things done. So if we go through this and we just keep cutting out interesting designs or details, you're going to be better off for it because you can do things like bevel, mouse wheel up once. So you can select less with control number pad minus. So you can select the center edge. You can hit Alt S, bring it in a little, bring it in a lot if you want. Now I can select more. Actually, on this one, maybe not. Maybe just take this one and just Shift E it. But sometimes you can run holding edges on these, like you can bevel that outer edge, and sometimes that can be quite useful. You see this little edge here in the middle here doesn't quite work maybe as well as we would want it to, right? We could use it maybe, but these usually work better, kind of hitting out to the ends of the edges like this for obvious reasons. It creates kind of a quad. So be careful with kind of how you cut things too. Not that you can't use that, but you're probably going to end up running another edge out. And that's going to look better now when it subdivides. So same with like over here. These, you can shift things a little bit. They don't have to be perfect. You could leave that separated, or we can just take these and work them into position here. You just want to be a little bit more cautious on the vertical ones than maybe the horizontal ones. But you can see how that's working out now. We'll connect that one over to there. All right. And if you ever have curves, of course, use don't use all creases. But you get the idea. We can do a little detail like that now. I want to create a couple more maybe. I'm not real sure kind of design I want here, but doing 45-degree angle cuts, also very good. So you can always do that. You might want to space this out a little bit better. Maybe align that a bit. Space it out a bit. You're trying to find a balance here for what you need. All right. Now here's the fun part. We obviously can do depth because we've been doing some, but we can do quite a bit of depth if we wanted. So like this whole edge maybe. Now of course I'd want to correct this little area here by pulling that down, but you can see where that's going to go, right? Yeah. So this is just maybe one way of working on cylinders too. There's of course other options. It depends on the object that you're creating, what its purpose is anyways. Because if you're working on like game objects, for example, or excuse me, if you're doing game models, you might be able to just do like straight out low poly stuff and texture it in Substance Painter and create similar looking results. You don't always have to go through this whole route like this. Concept pieces, a lot of times you could just do Boolean Ngon and use bevel shaders. You don't have to necessarily do the subdivision or use creases and all that. But so it's really up to you to kind of come up with what you want to create. And use the different techniques that, make sense for your project. But this is a very strong workflow here. So it'll get you somewhere at least, right? So we got all this kind of cut up now. If we want to bend it, we can. When we bend it all the way back around, it's going to be hard to see unless maybe we shade it auto smooth real quick. You see the little break? That's because it's not welded together. We need to weld it. Okay. And that should work out fine. Just leave it very low values anyways. You can add another subdivision later. And you can set this one to also maybe keep corners, but we shouldn't have any issue with that right now. The main thing with the second one is we don't want to use creases. Okay. When we turn creases off, we see what we get here. It's kind of like, it's okay, but it's not quite what we were modeling or thinking we were going to end up with. So that first subdivision, you tap it twice, all right? Or 3 times or whatever the case. You can up-res this basically, right? So you can keep up-resing it like this. Now, here's the trick. You might want to keep it a little bit lower, maybe something more like that. But we're going to go just a tad bit higher because you can keep working on it at this level much easier. So you can do like a modeling process of like large, medium, small. You start with the real large stuff. You apply a subdivision. You work on some medium stuff or some little bit smaller stuff. Then you can apply a subdivision. You can work on even smaller stuff. So we're going to skip that whole in-between section there. And we're just going to keep going right, to something where it's really small like this maybe. Or like this perhaps. You can apply that first subdivision. Okay. And when you do that, maybe we turn some of these off in the edit mode real quick. Right. We could still run around and use the creases, but they don't take effect anymore, by the way. So you can actually get rid of them if you wanted to. Now, this is where the fun begins because this is where you're going to do all your detail work, right? So it's kind of like, you know, we delete this maybe, come through here, and maybe we use vertex snapping. So we can hit easy, hold control, grab here, press F, 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 all right? And we'll fill all the way through there. You can see we got that one extra edge. I didn't realize we did that. So let's just add a loop cut, grab these with alt clicking, control F, grid fill. Alt click, control F, grid fill. We can do that. Now this is going to fall apart. Okay. We could continue trying to use creases if we really wanted to, but a lot of times you're going to find, you can see this is why when it turns into a complete cylinder, it becomes kind of a bad process. It's hard to work on and check what it's doing with the subdivision. So well, let's go back over here. So, but this can be kind of problematic because we could use creases, but at this point, you're better off switching to just regular subdivision with holding edges. Right? Change the profile to 1. And now, anytime you need anything to be held in a certain shape in here, you want to try to get it to a high enough resolution where it's not too crazy to work with, but you can also shift things around if needed. And it might create a little bit of a flat spot when it bends out, but it shouldn't be too bad, like not very noticeable anyways. You can also go back and make corrections. If you need things to stay flat against an edge, for example, you can do something like that. Use the alignment tools with machine tools. You can cut in additional details and you can do all kinds of fun work at this point. You know, use loop tools maybe. Say, hey, you need to do that. You can maybe inset, hold control, grab this edge here, boundary select, so select loops, boundary loop, and then bevel that, right? So you can do your cylindrical pieces now, and so on and so forth. And so we're not going to detail this whole thing, but you can do lots of really just simple edits and just have a lot of fun with it, really. I mean, if you wanted to do, let's just say a little section here like this, you could just grab a single strip, you can extrude that out, you can bring it down, and you have to bevel this like you're doing, like basically like you're auto smoothing. You don't bevel the whole thing, obviously. You do the select corners here where it would sharpen. Now, unfortunately, Blender used to have a select sharp edges option, and they took it out and replaced it with mark or create sharp edges or whatever. The oh, wrong thing there. Let's go back a sec. Edge. It's now set sharpness by angle, right? So they kind of got rid of that selection ability, and now that makes it a little bit harder to actually bevel things like this, which I'm kind of bummed about. But maybe maybe they can bring it back or something. Because you could just do bevels like this all day. Like you could do chamfers. You don't necessarily even have to do 2 segments, right? Because that's going to be very sharp. So if you want a little bit of a softer look, you might get away with just a chamfer, and it'll subdivide something like that. Now you notice because we're doing just regular subdivision at this point, we have a little bit of an issue with that corner there. Okay, because that whole top edge is getting pulled, because basically this is turning into something like this, which is what you want anyways, but we kind of want to get through that whole top edge at some point. And we can kind of reconfirm this edge if we want by just doing a little bevel on it. That's a little bit smaller. So you can start to control all the fine detail of the model now. You can make little panels, and you can still do lots of cuts and all kinds of fun stuff, but you'll have to fix the topology around it. It's not too crazy. It's not like a terrible process or anything, but you got to find ways to balance things out. Up res, down res, local areas and things like that. So, and yep, that's the main idea. And you know, shift things around. If you've already done the bevels, it's hard to shift them around. So you could use maybe like weighted bevels or something, but you can see when you do that, what happens is you end up with like a notch, like right here at the top. So what we would do, I might turn that bend off, but just get rid of that one, and maybe even this one, and then just re-loop cut them out. That'll give you a nicer result there. Okay. But you see how it starts to play out. It works really well, and you can make not just a mesh like this, right? Like we can make it hollow if we wanted to, and we push it off the center axis. Okay. And so when it bends, you know, we can do all kinds of crazy stuff with this, right? We can do stuff like that maybe. And remember, I was talking about the profile at the start, right? You could treat the whole mesh as a profile if you wanted to. It's a little hard to get it right, but you either use smooth or linear, and you can sometimes do this where like it's a very, like it's maybe too flat. It's not very dimensional. So you might be able to grab a section of it, maybe not this back corner here. So we can Alt Z, grab the whole section. Maybe don't grab those ones either. And maybe we can do that. If we get a good selection, maybe we could just pull the whole thing forward on Y. Mouse wheel around a little. Sometimes you don't even need the proportional edit. You see? Well, you might get away with something like that. But you could, in theory at least, have a lot of fun creating very curvy ones too. Do stuff like that, right? So I don't know if this wall looks that good with the curvy stuff, but you can definitely play around with this idea. Shift that whole section forward real quick. Add a couple loop cuts. And now you can start seeing what's going on there. We'd have to go around and do some corrections apparently, because there's a little bit of oddities going on here. I don't know if that's a good call on that section like that. Because it, maybe if we inset it first and then pull it forward, it might work out better. It's really this like bottom edge having a fit, I think. So we probably would also want to do this when you have the creases, but for now, we'll try to make it work. You can be kind of sloppy with these things to some degree. Now, normally what I would use this for is for baking, right? So I would just create a mesh that I can bake. And it's not really a big deal. It looks very like stretched out too. I'm not a big fan of that. And we can make them taller. Work something out there. Still feels very, yeah, out of proportion, right? So you gotta be careful with stuff like that, perhaps. You see now, if we had cylinders everywhere or circles, it'll all be goofy looking. The rest of it doesn't change too much, so it's not too bad. If you ever had to change something like that. So yeah, you can go extreme with these, is what I'm trying to point out here. Like, you don't have to be kind to your model, basically. You can just do what you got to do and make it happen. I think I'm going to shrink that down a little, refill it, extrude it. Come in here and just bevel it real quick. Oh, still is going to stretch out now because we've done all that stretching. Okay. It really just, yeah, it's just going to work the way it works sometimes, so you got to be careful. You don't push it too far, maybe. And I really want it to be a little bit different than that. But oh, here's something else we can do. Try this anyways. If we took the whole mesh and just duplicate it, use vertex snapping, snap this one to that one. AM merged by distance, symmetrize. We can create the repetition too, right? So you can see now we got um, three openings. So that's going to actually squish it kind of back down as well, potentially. Oh, apparently I copied over a bad. So you got to be careful when you do this one because this can be problematic. Now, actually, you know what? Let's go back a second. See if we can control Z back real quick. You could try doing it like that if you wanted. You could probably also use an array. So if you wanted to do an array, keep it more non-destructive. We're going to do it in the negative one, right? And we're going to make sure this is right before all of it takes place. Okay. And you can see how that works out. Just make sure you merge them. And you can set that really low if you need to. And yep, there you go. So if you want to just keep array in it, watch this. Ready? It's like little tricks like this that you would learn when working on things like this. And it's just, if you have never seen it before, it kind of, you just don't know, you know? So a cylinder doesn't have to be something real hard to work on. It. Just think of it as like a trim sheet or a wall. And then you can start having a lot of fun with this. Use this method of modeling. It's going to be way better than trying to work on directly on a cylinder. If you ever find yourself working directly on a cylinder, it's very challenging, right? I might make more videos about that one later on because there are ways to actually do it and not completely screw it up, but it's very hard to keep it all straight and in line and all that. And so, but you can do pretty much anything you need to do with this one. Probably fix some errors in it and whatnot. Eventually you get to this point where you got your array. It would be nice if we could split things before the array, but Blender has a really weird thing about working with that simple deform, and we can't do groups of objects. So it's kind of what it is, but we'll just apply some of this. Apply the weld too. We won't apply the subdivision though, so it's a little easier to work on. The thing I wanted to point out here real quick is like these little sections that we do, any kind of loop like this, where it's enclosed in the shape, we can do select loop inner region. And we could separate things like that if needed, okay? So once the bend is actually applied to it, now we have the ability to go through here and do this. But highly encourage, you know, duplicating stuff as you work on it. So that way you don't end up with a situation where you need to go back and you can't really do that. This probably should have a seam in there at some point. Like either it gets pushed in or we just extrude that back or something. And so we don't have to do all these like one at a time either. We can just select one and move on. Just Alt Shift click. Okay. Just trying to get a hold of those edges real quick. And you can see how that works out, right? So we can do the loop inner region selection, then we can separate. I think we got to do these last ones over here though. You can Alt Q between objects, by the way. So Alt Q. Oh. Usually you can. I don't know why it wasn't working. Because it was already selected. That's why it was blue. Is that one different? No, that is different. That's the wrong one. That's why. There you go. Separate those now. Okay. So maybe let's just give them some color real quick. Just use a darker gray so we can see the differences here between the panels or whatever we created. Right. Pretty simple, easy stuff overall. And something you can do, right? And so you have creative freedom here. We'll go back to the original and take a look at it one more time. So you put some time into this, and I went really high on this, which isn't necessarily a great thing, but you actually spend some time on the design. The design is the hard part. The modeling techniques aren't that crazy. I ended up using the Turbo Smooth setup a little bit on this one, but You can see here's the triangles all breaking down. They're doing the redirects. And so that's pretty common, all right? And some of this maybe I lost the creases or something, but I was doing a lot of manual subdivision in this one as well. So you go through and you start working the details in like this. You do your pushed in little um, sections where we did the panels and whatnot, all that stuff, right? So anytime you got to change something, you can have fun with it. If you're at a high enough density while detailing, it's actually kind of fun because you can take sections like this maybe, and you don't necessarily have to do anything but like push them up, create those kind of cool effects that a lot of wall panels and stuff have. So if we look back at this thing, you can see it does a number like this, but it kind of gets dragged out. So you can just loop cut into it, hit E and F, make it even, let it kind of do its thing there. And now it's just going to tighten that area up. Just an additional loop cut, right? So being very precise with what you're doing can be helpful if you have a lot of stuff going on a single like object. You can always layer different objects on top of this stuff, which makes it look even better or more interesting. Like so, like this. Well, this was modeled as one piece actually, but you got some different objects here on this one. Now, so like I was saying, there's different ways of working different things and different ways of working cylinders for different purposes. I'm gonna leave you this, or leave you with this, anyways. The this and this piece were made basically the same way. This down here is just a basic quick model with the turbo smooth applied to it. But this guy up here is a little bit different. This was a Boolean Ingon model that got quad remeshed and then sculpted. So I'm telling you, there's different techniques of creating hard surface. And you can see one of the big issues with this one is the topology doesn't flow perfectly. And it's a little bit hard to sculpt really good details because you can get little notches on the masks and things like that. And to smooth them out, it's quite a bit challenging because then you start losing all your sharp edges and stuff, or your sharp corners at least. Now, I'll do more videos on like hard surface sculpting stuff later on, but that's basically what's going on here. It's just some quick hard surface Boolean Ingon stuff, and then just quad remesh, multi-resed, and then so you can see like, that's sculpted, right? That's sculpted. You don't necessarily need to model everything like this. So think about the way a lot of game artists work anyways. They do kind of like a mid poly / low poly model. They take it to ZBrush, they Z remesh it and all that fun stuff, and then they sculpt on it, add all this really cool detail, and they use that as the high poly, right? Blender has a hard time doing uh, high poly, high detail, hard surface 3D models because it doesn't hit the resolution that you usually need when sculpting. So it gets close, but it's pretty chunky to work with. Like I think this one's like what 2 million triangles. This one's about two. So those aren't too bad. I think if the topology was a little better, that would work better. You can see this one is very low actually compared to the others. So and it looks very complicated. So there's always these techniques that you utilize when creating hard surface stuff, anyways, that you can utilize. You start with something kind of simple and add like a body piece or like the main shape, and you add detail in these areas. This you use a little bit higher polygon count perhaps, while this stays a little simpler and doesn't have to be quite as sharp. So you can you can add more detailed stuff in the middle, so this stays lower tri count, these become higher tri count. And then you can build up complexity in like certain areas, right? Not everything has to be, like crazy necessarily like this, unless you want it like that, I guess. But and you can ultimately do this kind of stuff in Substance Painter, which I still need to do a video on, where you hand paint it or create height maps that turn into normal maps, and you can make it look just like this, but as a texture. It'd be really hard to see a difference on the end result in the game model, anyways. But it takes a little bit of time to do that over there. But in some ways, it's more forgiving. Some ways, it's not as flexible. So there's a give and take to everything. And so don't be afraid of experimenting with all the different techniques and tools, learning like the core of all of this is just learning to model with quads and do subdivision, right? And then everything else is just modeling, right? So booleans, they behave in a predictable manner. Subdivision, when you're doing different types of subdivision, It's all predictable at that point. When you start sculpting or quadri meshing or doing booleans and all that, it all adds together. It's just different tools that you can utilize, right? It's not necessarily like one size or one way fits all, you know. And so learn your tools, your techniques, and do practice projects, but really just fiddle around with some of those things you see in videos, whether it's like a screw modifier, displacement, or any of the modifiers for the most part. Learn how like guys are using them in different kind of stack setups, and just work with them from there. You can watch time lapse videos and just kind of see what guys are doing along the way. It takes a little while to start to understand all of it, especially if you're doing like completely non-destructive workflow or whatever. But it is possible. It's a little confusing, but it is possible to learn it all. It takes time, and hopefully the cylinder one at least helps you out now. So with a little bit of time and effort, I think this one took like 2 hours maybe. This one was like an hour, and then this was like 30 minutes, something like that. Sculpting's fast when you want it to be. So it, you know, all in all, this isn't like done in instant, you know, like it takes time. Imagine spending the whole day on it, right? Or imagine spending a few days on coming up with a concept design while utilizing some of these techniques or strategies. You come up with really cool stuff, guys. So I'm going to leave you with that. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will check you out in the next one. All right. Take care.